He sent me a photo of his hospital bracelet at 11:47 that night. Still here, love. Miss you. Happy anniversary. That was what my husband wrote to me. Those exact words. And while I was still holding my phone under the low light of the restaurant table, still letting that familiar warmth move through my chest the way it always did when he decided to sound tender through a screen, my husband's brother was 3 seats away at the bar, leaning so close to a woman that his shoulder pressed into hers. A woman I recognized before I recognized what I was seeing, my daughter-in-law, Nolan's wife. The room did not change when I understood it. The piano near the entrance kept playing. Someone across the dining room laughed at something private and happy. A server moved past me carrying 2 glasses of red wine on a tray that only trembled because my own hand had started to grip the edge of the table too tightly. I did not look away. I made myself keep looking because I have lived long enough to know that the mind will offer you every comfortable explanation before it lets you have the truth. My name is Vera, and by the time that message came through, I had already been sitting alone at that table for 40 minutes. It was our 32nd anniversary. I had come early on purpose the way I always did, because I liked having the room to myself before the evening started. Liked choosing which chair to sit in, liked the quiet before the candles got interesting. 32 years of marriage teaches a woman how to fill a table for two by herself without feeling the absence too sharply. My husband had called me that afternoon from the hospital. A water main had burst in the building where he kept his practice, some problem with the old plumbing on the second floor, and the emergency team needed access to his office. He said he would be there only a couple of hours. He said he would make it. He said he was sorry and that I should order something good while I waited. So I had ordered sparkling water, and I had waited. And then I had looked up at exactly the wrong moment, or perhaps the right one, depending on how you measure these things now. My brother-in-law did not have his arm around her. I want to be fair about what I saw. He was simply turned toward her in a way that left no space between them. His hand was near her glass, not touching it, just near it. The kind of nearness that belongs to habit. She was not leaning away. Her shoulders were angled toward him in the way that people angle themselves toward warmth without thinking about it. Their mouths were moving, low and close, the way mouths move when the words are only meant for one person. I watched them for what felt like a long time and was probably less than a minute. Then she turned her head just slightly, and the bar light caught the side of her face, and I recognized her completely, not the recognition of surprise, the recognition of confirmation. Something in my body had already known before my mind did. I set my phone face down on the table. I did not reach for my water. I sat very still and told myself to breathe evenly, because the one thing I did not want to do was make noise before I understood what I was seeing. My brother-in-law, my husband's younger brother, who had been at our wedding, who had stood beside my husband that day, who had held our son at the hospital, who came to every Christmas dinner, who had a key to our lake house outside Peterborough because we had given it to him ourselves. And my daughter-in-law, the woman my son had brought home 4 years ago with that careful hopefulness young men have when they want you to love someone as much as they do. The woman who sat at my kitchen table last Thanksgiving and told me she hoped I wasn't pushing myself too hard with the renovation, that I should rest more, that I deserved to rest. I stared at the two of them from across that room and felt something cold and clean move through me with a precision that was almost gentle. I did not cry. I did not stand up. I did not let my face do anything that the room could read. A young server came to check on me, asked whether I was ready to order or still waiting, and I heard myself say I was still waiting, in a voice so steady it surprised me. He nodded and walked away. When I looked back at the bar, my brother-in-law had moved slightly, just enough to rest his hand over hers where it sat on the counter. Not quickly, not nervously, the way a person touches something familiar. I looked down at my phone again, at the photo of my husband's hospital bracelet. Had those words. Still here, love. Miss you. Happy anniversary. The cruelty of it was not in the lie. It was in how practiced the lie was, how smooth, how completely it fit inside the shape of everything I already believed. If you're listening to this right now, wherever you are, I want you to tell me what time it is. I mean that, not as a game, just because sometimes it helps to know that another person is sitting with you in the moment when something you cannot unhear is being said out loud. I kept watching them. I kept watching because the mind has a way of trying to bargain with what the eyes have already settled. I gave it that time. I watched the way he turned the glass toward her, the way she did not look around the room, not once, not toward the entrance, not toward the mirror behind the bar. People who believe they might be seen look around. People who feel safe do not. That was when I understood I was not watching a first time, I was watching a routine. I had already decided to leave when the hostess approached me instead of another server. She was older, maybe my age, with the kind of professional composure that comes from years of managing other people's difficult evenings. She stopped beside my table and bent slightly. "Mrs. Vera," she said, quietly enough that no one nearby could have heard, "I wanted to let you know that we have your regular table in the back available, if you'd prefer somewhere a little quieter this evening." I looked at her. "We've met?" "You and your husband celebrated your 30th here," she said. "I remember." There was something careful in her face. Not pity, exactly. More like the expression of someone who has seen this kind of thing before and understands that what a person needs in this moment is not explanation, but exit. "I think I'd like to step outside for a moment," I said. She nodded. "Of course." I gathered my coat and my bag with the same unhurried movements I would have used if the evening had been going perfectly. I did not look toward the bar again. Not because I doubted what I had seen, but because I had seen enough. When something has already finished becoming true, looking at it again does not give you more truth. It only gives you more pain. Outside, the October air was sharp and clean in the way Canadian autumn gets in the evenings. That particular cold that smells like something ending. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let it settle against my face. I did not drive home right away. I sat in my car in the parking lot on Bloor Street with both hands resting in my lap and the engine off, and I let my mind do what it needed to do. Not frantically, carefully. The way you sort through something fragile. My husband had been called away from our anniversary dinner. That was the first fact. He had sent me a photograph as proof. That was the second. And my brother-in-law, who had presumably known about this dinner, who had our phone numbers and our address and 32 years of access to our lives, was sitting at the bar of the restaurant where I had been waiting, with my son's wife pressed against his shoulder like they had done this many times before. That was the third fact, and the third one changed the shape of the first two. I did not go home angry. I went home thinking. The house was quiet when I let myself in through the side door off the garage. Our dog didn't bark. He was too old by then and too accustomed to late returns. He only lifted his head from his bed in the kitchen and set it back down again when he saw it was me. I took off my coat and hung it in the closet and stood in the front hallway for a moment listening. The house had its particular night sounds: the furnace, the refrigerator, the old clock on the mantel in the living room that my mother had given us when we got married, and that still kept better time than anything digital in this house. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water and stood at the counter drinking it slowly. My husband called at 11:15. He said the plumber had finally sorted it and that he was leaving now, and that he was so sorry about tonight. His voice was even and tired in the way that voices are when they have been performing evenings carefully. I have been married to this man for 32 years and know the sound of him after a long day at his practice. I know the sound of him when he is being careful. That night he was being careful. "It's all right," I said. "I came home early anyway." He exhaled, too easily. "We'll do it properly this weekend," he said. "Somewhere nice, wherever you want." "Of course," I said. After we hung up, I stood there in the kitchen for a long time with my hand still resting on the phone. Then I washed my glass, dried it, set it back in the cupboard, and went upstairs. I did not sleep well, but I did not lie awake in pieces either. I lay there in the dark and thought with the kind of steadiness that comes when emotion has not yet found the shape it needs to fall apart in. My mind kept moving backward through the year, then further back than that. The calls my husband made from his car, which I had noticed and filed away as the habit of a busy man. The family dinners where my brother-in-law had been quieter than usual, almost careful with me in a way I had noticed and then not followed. The times my daughter-in-law had arrived alone to things, citing reasons that were always just plausible enough. The particular ease she and my brother-in-law had around each other at Easter this past April, which I had thought was simply familiarity. It is easy to mistake ease for innocence. None of these things stood alone as anything. Together, they stood as something I did not want to name yet. My husband left early in the morning, same as always. Coffee, briefcase, the small habits of a man who has arranged his life efficiently. He kissed my forehead before he left. I let him. I was already sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee and a notepad I wasn't really writing in, and I let him kiss my forehead and listened to the door close behind him, and then sat in the quiet of the house for a long time after. I am not a woman who goes through pockets or reads messages over shoulders. I never have been. That is not who I am, and more practically, it is not effective. People who suspect start acting like people who suspect, and that warns the other person before you understand the shape of what you're dealing with. So I did not go through anything. I started remembering instead. The weekend he had spent in Toronto in February, supposedly at a conference. He had sent me photos, as he always did. The hotel room, the skyline, the dinner he'd had with colleagues. I had not questioned it because there was no reason to question it. There had been no reason to question any of it because I had not yet been given the lens I was carrying now. I remembered something else. At Christmas, my daughter-in-law had arrived with my son 40 minutes after everyone else. She had been apologetic, said traffic from Oakville had been brutal. My son had nodded and agreed, looking slightly tired, but my brother-in-law had glanced at his phone twice in the 30 minutes before they arrived, and I had noticed it and thought nothing of it. I thought something of it now. 3 days after the anniversary dinner, I drove back to the restaurant, not to the bar, to speak with the hostess. She was there when I arrived, just past 11 in the morning, when the lunch rush had not yet started and the place had the particular stillness of rooms that haven't yet been inhabited for the day. She recognized me immediately and came forward with the directness I appreciated. "I was hoping you might come back," she said. We sat at a corner table near the window with 2 coffees between us, and she did not make me work very hard for the truth. She had seen my brother-in-law there before with a woman, multiple times over the past 8 or 9 months, sometimes at the bar, once in the dining room, back corner. She said she had not connected it to me until she saw me waiting at my table on Wednesday evening, recognized my face from the 30th anniversary dinner 2 years prior, and understood what was happening. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know what the right thing to do was." "You did it anyway," I said. She looked at her coffee. They never seemed hidden. That was the part that troubled me. They came in like people with a regular arrangement. I asked whether she had ever seen anyone else with them. She said no, just the two of them. Always that same back corner preference when the bar wasn't available. I thanked her and left. I sat in my car in the street outside and let the information finish arranging itself. 8 or 9 months. Regular, comfortable enough to return to the same restaurant repeatedly. Not hidden, arranged. I thought about my son. I thought about what it would cost him to hear this, and when, and how, and in what order the facts needed to be laid down so that the truth arrived before the emotion did. Because emotion alone can be argued with, evidence, when it is placed carefully, does not give a person anywhere comfortable to hide. I waited 9 days before I called Nolan. I will not pretend those 9 days were easy. Every morning, my husband brought coffee upstairs, same as always, and sat on the edge of the bed telling me about his day ahead, and I listened with the same attention I always had. Every evening, my brother-in-law texted the family group chat some small thing, a hockey score, a weather warning, something about the road conditions outside Barrie, and I watched my husband reply with the same warmth he always had. And I understood that some people build their entire lives around the assumption that they will not be found. Nolan answered on the second ring. He was between meetings, distracted, then warm when he heard my voice go quiet. "Mum, you okay? I need you to come for dinner," I said. "Just you." A pause. "Just me?" "Yes." He came that Thursday evening. He walked in the way my son always walks into this house, with the ease of a man who was raised here and knows every creak in the hallway floor. He hugged me in the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water from the tap and leaned against the counter looking at me the way he had been looking at me since he was 7 years old and could tell when something was wrong. "You're not sick," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said, "I'm not sick." I sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had done every difficult conversation this family had ever needed to have, where I had told him about his grandfather, where he had told us about losing his first real job, where things that mattered got said without the distraction of anywhere more comfortable to be. I told him I needed him to listen all the way through before he said anything. He nodded. I told him what I had seen at the restaurant, not dramatically, in the order it happened, with the details that mattered. His father's message, the 40 minutes alone, looking up at the bar, recognizing her, the way they sat together, the hostess, going back to speak with her, 8 or 9 months. Nolan did not make a sound for a long time after I finished. Then he said, very quietly, "Mum." "I know," I said. "No," he set his glass down. "No, you don't know. Because she told me 2 months ago she wanted some space, that she needed time to figure things out. I've been sleeping in the guest room. I thought she was—" He stopped. "I thought she was going through something." She had already started preparing the exit. That was what settled into me then, cold and clean. She had been creating distance with my son while continuing everything else, building space into the structure so that when the arrangement became something more permanent, the separation would already have a head start. Nolan's jaw worked once. He looked at the table. His hands, which had been loose on either side of his water glass, tightened slowly. "How long were you going to wait before telling me?" he asked. "Long enough to be certain I had everything you needed to hear." He looked up at me then. His eyes were red at the edges, but his face was steady in the way that his father's face was never steady when things got difficult. Nolan had always been the one in this family who got quieter when he was hurt. My brother-in-law used to joke about it, said Nolan's silences could turn a room. "Does Dad know?" he asked. "No," I said. He absorbed that. All of it. What it meant that I had been carrying this. What it meant that his father was still in the dark. What it meant that the three of them had been moving through our family like something that expected to be permanent. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "I want to understand the full shape of it before we move," I said. "I don't want to give either of them the chance to get ahead of the story." Nolan looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, with the kind of decision in it that reminded me of my father. "Tell me what you need from me." What I needed from him was steadiness, the kind that performs normalcy well enough to buy time. He delivered it. He went home that evening and said nothing to his wife. He told me later that she was in the kitchen when he got back, watching something on her laptop, and that she looked up and smiled at him in that careful way she had been smiling at him for months. He said goodnight. He went to the guest room. He lay there in the dark and felt the shape of his own life changing around him without making a sound. I watched my husband that same week with different eyes. Not angry eyes, clear ones. I noticed the way he angled his phone away when he was responding to messages, the way he was slightly more attentive to me than usual, The extra considerateness of a man who is managing guilt by increasing his visible kindness elsewhere. I had taken it for maturity for years. I understood it differently now. I called our family lawyer on a Tuesday morning. Shelley had handled our wills and our property transfers and the small legal details that accumulate over 3 decades of shared life. She knew us. She knew enough to understand immediately, when I outlined what I needed, that this was not a simple thing. "How long do you want to take before you move?" she said. 2 more weeks, I said. I need the financial picture cleaner. Because there was a financial picture. There is always a financial picture when a man has been managing money for a long time and has begun to believe that the person he shares it with is not paying attention. I had not been paying attention the way I should have. I had trusted the routine of it. The statements came. I looked at the larger numbers. I trusted that efficiency and trust were the same thing. They are not. Our joint account was one Shelley helped me review carefully over 2 meetings at her office on Bay Street. The patterns were small enough to feel incidental and consistent enough to feel intentional. Transfers to a secondary account I had not been aware of, opened 18 months prior. Not large amounts individually. Together, over 18 months, substantial. Shelley laid them out in a single column, and I sat across from her desk looking at the number and understanding that my husband had not been planning a clean break. He had been planning a funded one. Nolan found something separately. He had gone looking in their shared home office for a folder with their car insurance renewal and had found instead a printed email from a real estate agent in Hamilton, flagging a property listing as available and asking whether he wanted to proceed to the showing stage. The email was addressed to my brother-in-law. The listing was a 2-bedroom unit in a newer building, walking distance from downtown. The kind of place someone chooses when they are building something small and self-contained and do not intend to be alone in it. He called me from the driveway. "They were building something," he said. "I know," I said. "She was sleeping in my guest room while he was looking at apartments for the two of them." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was level. "When are we doing this?" "Thursday," I said. Shelley's conference room on the 4th floor of her building had the kind of impersonal calm that legal offices are designed to produce. Neutral walls, a long table, enough chairs for the number of people who needed to be there. Nolan and I arrived 20 minutes early. He wore his work clothes because I had asked him to. Composure reads differently when it is dressed for it. My husband arrived alone first. He came in looking the way he always looked when someone had asked him to do something administratively tedious, cooperative but faintly put upon. He saw Shelley, nodded, saw Nolan, and relaxed slightly, saw my face and slowed. Just slightly, but he slowed. He sat across from us. My brother-in-law arrived 4 minutes later because I had asked Shelley to stagger the invitations by 5 minutes. He came in and saw my husband first and started to smile, and then he saw Nolan and did not finish the smile. Then he saw me. He sat down without speaking. My daughter-in-law had been told by my son that there were family documents requiring all signatures. She arrived last, wearing the composed expression of a woman who has been maintaining a particular version of herself for long enough that it has become second nature. She sat next to my brother-in-law without thinking about it. Then she understood what she had done and moved very slightly, but not quickly enough for it not to be noticed. Nolan did not look at her. Shelley opened the meeting the way she opened all her meetings, with the particular formal neutrality of a woman who has been doing this for 30 years and is not interested in anyone's feelings about process. She began by placing the account transfer documents on the table. Not all at once. One page at a time, the way you lay things out when you want each item to have the space it deserves. My husband looked at the first page, then the second. Something moved to his face that was not quite recognition and not quite alarm. The specific expression of a man who is calculating how much is already known before he decides what to say. Then Shelley placed the real estate email, the Hamilton listing, the timeline. My brother-in-law's hand moved slightly on the table, as if reaching for something, then stopped. Then she placed a photograph. I had taken it on my phone in the restaurant. My hand lifted in that particular suspended second after I had decided to leave. I had not planned to take it. My hand had moved before I told it to, but it had caught what it needed to catch. The two of them at the bar, his shoulder against hers, her face turned toward his, with the ease of someone who had no reason to look anywhere else. My daughter-in-law saw it first. I watched the composure leave her face in the particular way it leaves people who have been performing for too long. All at once, the way a held breath releases. My husband looked at it last. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. I did not speak. He said my name in that low measured tone I recognized, the one he used when he wanted to make something reasonable that was not. Vera, whatever you're thinking. No, I said. One word, quiet, and it landed the way I needed it to. He stopped. Shelley continued, because Shelley does not require anyone's emotional readiness to proceed. She outlined what had been documented, what had established, and what the next steps would be in terms of the separation of shared assets, the protection of accounts, and the legal separation timeline under Ontario family law. The room was very quiet. My brother-in-law looked at my husband. My husband did not look back. My daughter-in-law looked at Nolan. Nolan looked at the table. I looked at all three of them and felt something settle in me that had nothing to do with satisfaction. It was quieter than that, more final. The specific stillness that comes when you have put down something you have been carrying for a very long time without realizing how heavy it was. You didn't just make a choice, I said. I let the room have a moment with that. Then you asked the people who trusted you most to fund it. Nobody answered. There was nothing left that language could do for them. The months that followed were not clean or fast. They never are. There were delays and document requests and conversations that went through lawyers because I would not have any conversation with my husband that did not go through lawyers. Every exchange routed through record has a way of making personality irrelevant, and that was what I needed. I did not need him to explain himself to me. I needed him to be unable to revise the explanation once it was written down. The secondary account was addressed in the settlement. The transfers were accounted for. It took longer than it should have, but it was thorough, because Shelley is thorough. My brother-in-law did not contest anything. He had nothing to contest. He had been in possession of a key to our lake house, which he returned by courier in an envelope without a note. I found that detail more revealing than anything he could have said. Nolan ended his marriage in the quiet way he does most hard things, without spectacle. There were conversations that did not go anywhere, and silences that said more. She left the house in stages, the way people leave when they know the story is already over but haven't yet decided they deserve to say so out loud. He told me she tried once to explain the sequence of things. He told me he listened all the way through and then said that explanation had nowhere left to land. I was proud of him for that. I didn't say it outright, but he knew. My son took time. He got quieter before he got steadier, the way people do when humiliation has nowhere to go but inward first. There were weeks when he called more than usual, and weeks when he didn't call at all. And I gave him both without making either of them into something they needed to justify. Grief does not keep to a schedule. It keeps to its own rhythm, and the kindest thing you can do is not try to speed it along. He laughed finally one Sunday in February at something small I said over the phone about the dog, and the sound of it was so sudden that it surprised us both. I held that sound in my chest for the rest of the day. As for me, I did not come out of this with anything I would call victory. I came out of it with clarity. There is a difference, and it matters. Clarity is quieter. It does not ask for applause. It simply makes the room feel different, makes you move through it differently, makes the walls yours in a way they had stopped being without your noticing. My husband no longer has access to this house. Not because of argument, because of terms. Things that go through record have boundaries that personalities cannot override. He adjusted to this the way people adjust when there is no longer any reasonable alternative. The adjustment was not my concern. I still go to that restaurant. I asked to be seated at a different table the first time back, and then the second time I sat where I always used to sit because it is a good restaurant and the room belongs to me as much as it ever belonged to that evening. The hostess who helped me is still there. We do not discuss it. We have a particular understanding that exists between women who have seen each other clearly in a difficult moment, which requires nothing more than a nod. There are things I know now that I didn't know then. That ease is not innocence. That consistency is not the same as loyalty. That a person can be given 32 years of genuine consideration and decide that what they actually wanted was the appearance of it while building something else entirely beneath the surface. But I also know this. They were not careful enough in the way that people are never careful enough when they have been comfortable for too long. Comfort makes a person stop looking over their shoulder. And once a person stops looking, they stop being able to see who is standing in the room. I was standing in the room. I will always have been standing in the room. There is a particular kind of grief that does not announce itself loudly. It arrives the way cold does in October, gradually, then all at once, until you realize you have been standing in it for much longer than you knew. I think about Vera often, not as a woman wronged though she was, as a woman who made a choice in the worst moment of her life to stay still when everything in her wanted to move. That kind of stillness is not passive, it is one of the hardest things a person can do. It requires you to believe that what you know is more powerful than what you feel, and to hold on to that belief when every nerve in your body is pulling the other direction. What she did in that restaurant, sitting back down, folding her hands, watching, that was not weakness. That was integrity under pressure. The kind that does not collapse when it becomes uncomfortable. The kind that does not reach for the easier story, just because the true one is harder to carry. We talk about doing the right thing as though it is simple, as though good people always find it obvious. But most of the time, doing right means sitting inside something painful long enough to understand it fully before you act. Vera did that. Night after night, in her own kitchen, across from a man she had built 32 years with, she chose honesty over comfort. Not his honesty, her own. And Nolan, he arrived at that kitchen table not knowing what was coming and left it changed in a way that cannot be undone. What I find remarkable about him is not that he was hurt. Of course he was hurt. He had every right to be, but that he did not let the hurt make his decisions for him. He went home that night and said nothing. He held what he knew and chose how to use it rather than letting it use him. That is not easy for anyone, but it is especially hard when the wound is fresh and the person who caused it is sleeping down the hall. It takes a kind of quiet courage that does not get celebrated the way louder things do. The people who betrayed them were not failed by some single catastrophic flaw. They were failed, I think, by the gradual erosion of something smaller, the daily habit of honesty, the small disciplines of being trustworthy when no one is checking. Actions compound quietly over time, the way money does, the way rust does. The arrangement they built did not appear one morning fully formed. It was assembled in small decisions, each one a little easier because the last one had gone unpunished. That is how this kind of damage works. Not in one dramatic choice, but in 100 unremarkable ones. What Vera and Nolan chose, to know fully, to move carefully, to let the truth be the loudest thing in the room, those choices compounded too, in the other direction. By the time they sat down in that conference room with Shelley's documents laid out on the table, they were not asking for anything to be believed. They were simply showing what was already true. There is a profound difference between those two things, and understanding it is the difference between justice that holds and justice that unravels. I did not come out of this story feeling triumphant on their behalf. I came out of it feeling something quieter, a kind of recognition that the people who survive these things intact are not the ones who fought the loudest or hurt the most. They are the ones who stayed clear, who held their own character together when someone else was busy dismantling it. Truth does not always move quickly, but it does not need to. It has patience that deception never manages to build.